Branson, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we have a very interesting webinar. We're going to be going over a lot of new information regarding cyber claims and what's going on in that area pertaining to community associations. And I wanted to mention that I record all of the webinars and put them on our website, which is kdisonline.com. So feel free to listen to our recordings at any point. This webinar will be recorded and you can listen to it again when you go to our website. And if you have any questions about any of the material that we go over today, please type them into the questions box. And if we have time at the end of today's presentation, we'll answer your questions. I'm now joined by Kevin Davis, the president of Kevin Davis Insurance. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Sherry. Oh, what an interesting day it's been, trying to get these things working.
Yes, we had, we were a little bit late, we had a little technical issue, but it all worked out. It all worked out fine. You know, that it happens, you know, it's a live webinar. So everybody knows it's live, Kevin, when we have technical issues, you know, and thanks for your patience, everybody. And Kevin, we have a great webinar. You know, cyber is on everybody's mind. You hear about all kinds of cyber issues happening and claims, etc. So today we're going to talk about, you know, what's going on in that area regarding community associations and what people can do about it.
Yeah, Sherry, you know what? I love when people call me up and ask me, have we got any claims X? And guess what? I got a phone call about a month ago and somebody said, have you got any cyber claims? Because I'm trying to sell cyber insurance. I haven't seen any cyber claims. So what we're going to do today is go over our cyber claims, the claims that we've seen, and things that you need to be concerned about when you're talking to your property managers, your community association, your homeowner association, whoever you're talking to, how important it is to have a cyber policy today. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a really, really good seminar. I'm on my phone because I'm in a hotel, and for some reason, the hotel does not allow me to do Zoom because of a lot of issues. So I'm on my phone. Hopefully it's going to work out pretty good. So let's get started.
Great. Yes, that's fantastic. Great. We're glad you have your phone, Kevin. That's wonderful. And now let's talk a little bit about, you know, the cyber claims trends that you're seeing. Like what's going on out there right now?
Okay. When we talk about cyber crime, cyber claims, cyber issues that we're saying, there are 4 issues that really, really come to mind for me. The first one is cyber crime. This is a loss of association's funds. Okay, that's exactly what we're talking about. You're talking about the operating account, the reserve account, those kind of things that really are going to make a difference when we have these kind of claims. And number 2 is ransom demands. Okay, these are extortion payments that are due out there to get access to the data. The third one is data breach. And this is the original thing we talked about cyber was a loss of data. And this is loss of data, you know, including your name, social security number, banking information. And finally, third-party cyber losses. This is the area that we're starting to see some claims in due to the board's failure to, you know, protect the data or protect funds. So those are the 4 areas that when we talk about cyber claims, they all fall into those unique areas there.
And Kevin, you know, as we talked about in previous webinars, you know, the board members now are responsible, or have always been responsible, but more so now than ever. You know, they're collecting the homeowner's personal information, their data, their names, their addresses, their social security numbers, etc. And they're in charge of all of this money, the reserve account. So they have a lot of responsibility at the end of the day. So that's why these claims can be very expensive. Very expensive. So now we're going to talk about, you know, what is the breakdown? Like, where are we seeing the most claims and what areas should people be most concerned about?
All right, this taken me a while. I took all of our cyber claims and divide them up into these 8 areas. Now, interesting, social engineering, something we've been talking about for a couple of years now, is now the leading area of claims for cyber. Social engineering is number 1. Number 2 is funds transfer fraud. And if you look at the next one of the other bigger ones up there called computer fraud. So if you take our social engineering, funds transfer fraud, and computer fraud, those are our crime losses. So those are our monetary losses. This is loss directly from financial loss, either somebody stealing an operating account or reserve account. So that's 2/3 of all of our losses. Our cyber losses impacting community associations are from coverages that's covered under the crime policy. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, that's quite a bit. That's a big chunk of claims coming from one particular area. That's something very much to be concerned about. And the interesting thing that comes to my mind is just a few years ago, Kevin, we didn't have
Mhm.
social engineering coverage, and really nobody had the coverage a few years ago. So this is all pretty
Mhm.
new, this type of
It's all
coverage.
pretty new, and it happened very, very quickly, very quickly. So you can
Hmm.
see now from this chart, again, this is the first time this chart's ever been done. And we're saying right now, 2/3 of all your cyber claims that you're going to see are from crime, commercial crime, crime that's
Hmm.
covered under your crime policy. Not, and it covered under your cyber policy also. But if you don't have a cyber policy, these are crime claims that should be picked up under crime policy. Okay. So it's crime and the
Hmm.
cyber. So
Okay.
the next area is extortion, cyber extortion. Now, this is interesting. It says 11%. However, it's a little bit more than 11% because if you look at something called security breach notification and computer legal experts, those are all also as a direct result of the extortion. And we'll talk a little bit about it before. So that 11% really is probably about 22%. So number one is crime losses. Number two is cyber extortion. Okay. And the next one, what we're talking about, is data breach. And data breach is what we've been worried about for all these years. And it's not been as big of a deal as we thought it would be. But it is comes in. And then finally, what brings up the rear is this privacy issue, which leads to the lawsuits. You know, we're seeing lawsuits, um, um, just privacy issues, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that is all your claims impacting community associations.
Okay. Thank you. That's very interesting. Very interesting. It's changed dramatically over the past few years. So this is good to be up to date on what's going on regarding claims and what area we're seeing the most of the claims come from. And now you mentioned that we talked on this chart, we have cyber crime. You talked about, those types of claims. That's usually loss of money, right, Kevin? That's where somebody's stealing money through some kind of
Exactly.
crime. So let's
That's what
talk
we're
about
talking
that a
about.
little bit. What are the different types of cybercrime that can happen and that associations should be aware of?
Okay, so we talk about first computer crime, computer fraud. That is 7% of all the claims. Now, what that really means is that somebody inside gets inside your premises. It could be somebody pretending to be a UPS person. It could be somebody pretending to be a janitor. It could be a friend of yours that come in, get access to your computer because we still put our passwords there on the side of our computer. Okay, somebody gets into it, sends the money out, directs them to pay, send money to your bank from inside the premises. That's your computer crime, 7%. The next area is funds transfer. That's somebody off the premises who sends you some kind of virus and they're waiting for you to go into your bank account and then they'll direct money and ask the financial institution to pay whatever the amount is to pay. And third
Okay.
thing is social engineering. This is the big one, 37%. So this is 2/3 of all your claims happening right here. Social engineering is loss of funds or data caused by a person pretending to be an employee, vendor, or client.
Hmm. An example of this comes to mind. I'll just tell a quick example. It was the first time I really heard of something like this was a few years ago. I was at a trade show in Florida, and a board member told me that somebody had sent an email to their treasurer asking the treasurer to cut a check to buy a painting for the lobby of their condo association, and it was a $10,000 painting. So luckily, the board member, the treasurer, picked up the phone and called that board member, but somebody had hacked their email and it looked very legitimate. It looked like the board member's email, the address was very similar. So that was the first time I've heard of something like this. So they were trying to trick them
Yeah.
into cutting a $10,000 check.
And again, if you think about what's happened over the past several years, it is now the number one area for claims. Now, what does a claim look like? What does it, and this is important one, what does it look like? This is how these things look. They're addressed to me and from somebody, like I say from a Bob Smith, who pretends to be UPS. And he puts a UPS, they make a fictitious name in there, and they're regarding the US UPS payment. Okay. Now, what they do is say, hey, see, please pay the attached invoice as soon as possible to avoid any late fees. And they'll say something like, please note the new banking and routing information.
Hmm.
That's what
Yeah,
it
and they
looks
make
like.
it,
When
it
you
looks,
see
and it
that,
looks very, hmm, it looks very legitimate. It looks very real, except for one little letter that's different. Hmm.
and one thing they also will do is they'll add a little thing on the bottom for more information. Please give me a call, and they put their fictitious phone number on there too. So people will call back there and to find out what's going on and everything, and they'll pay. This right now is the claim that we see more than anything else. And we're seeing more and more and more, especially when you have a relationship between the management company and the association. The association will
Hmm.
send a request to the management company and says, guess what? We need new paintings. We need new furniture. Please pay immediately or reimburse me immediately. And then they come to find out that it wasn't a real board member. It wasn't a real person that has access to the funds. It's been
Hmm.
happening more and more.
Hmm. I get these kinds of emails all the time. I get all kinds of fraudulent emails, and they look legitimate. And the good thing is now there's coverage for this type of a claim, where a few years ago there was no coverage. So people
And
would hand over the money or transfer the money, and there was zero coverage. They were really out of
and
luck.
and it's so important to understand that I would say most community associations out there do not have social engineering fraud coverage. So a third of all our claims are not covered under most crime policy. If you're listening to this right now, make sure that you have social engineering fraud coverage under your policy.
Mhm. Okay, great. That's very good information. Very, very good information. Fantastic. And now we're going to talk about, we're talking about social engineering quite a bit. How does it differ from computer fraud and funds transfer fraud, Kevin? What is the actual
Yeah.
difference?
And this is the question I get asked all the time, because basically what's happening on social engineering fraud is someone is getting access to your funds that they're not legally entitled to. So it's unauthorized access to the funds. The difference is when you talk about computer fraud and funds transfer fraud, the funds are transferred without the insured organization's knowledge or consent. That's the key word, the insured's knowledge or consent. So they don't know that money is being transferred out. In social engineering, an employee is unknowingly an active participant. They are giving the money away. So that's the
Hmm.
difference.
They're
It
basically
is
tricked into
critical.
it.
You're
Hmm.
tricked into it, and it's critical because most people think that just because that money is being sent out unauthorized, it should be computer fraud or funds transfer fraud. It is not, because it ensures knowledge and consent is important, and that's the difference.
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And people are being tricked all the time, especially when they send emails with links as well, and then they tell you to click on the link or open the PDF. I mean, that's also dangerous as well. That's something to keep in mind.
Mhm.
And then now we're going to talk about another area that we're seeing, Kevin, ransomware. Now, this was really popular for a while as well, and it's still going on, of course. This is, what I just talked about, where somebody might send you a link in an email, and you click on that link, and it downloads a virus onto your computer, et cetera, or it encrypts your information. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Sure. And what we're seeing, the biggest problem here is from the property management company, because the property management company is the one that's going to get hit with ransomware. Now, what happens is that once that property management company gets hit by ransomware, our client, who's the association, has a problem. How do they get access to their data? And does the person who stole who locked lock the property management company's information, do they have access to the data? Because if they have access to the data, so in other words, what happens is once that ransomware occurs, in fact, if you go to the next slide, it's going to look like that. So once you see that pop up, okay, that means your files have been encrypted. Now, sometimes the person who's
Mhm.
encrypting those files has access to the data. If they have access to the data, then our association is in trouble. Then they have to deal with notification costs. They have to deal with a lot of different things that's on top of the extortion demand. So the extortion demand may go to the property management company, but the association has to reap the benefits of it. They're being dragged into it because now their data is out there, so they need help also. So even though it doesn't impact them, it really does. So this is what you'll see. Now, in terms of the association itself, we had a situation where something like this popped in to the association and they notified the claims carrier that this would happen. And what they did is say, we demand 1 Bitcoin. That's all they want was 1 Bitcoin. And they
1 Bitcoin.
So they have all 1 Bitcoin because they have access to all your information. And basically what they did was put together a list of all the different companies they were attached to that was on their website. And they attached that to it. So basically all they told us do was cross out the X, restart your computer, cross out the X, and you have nothing to worry about. So it wasn't really a claim. But again, they didn't know. So they contact us from a claim point of view, and we talked them through it, and it wasn't a loss. It wasn't an issue at all. And we had several like this impacting the community association where they believe they had a ransomware in there, but it ended up not being anything significant because they did the things they're supposed to do. And that is, there's one thing that if you do it, you end up doing it. When you have any kind of ransomware, the best defense against ransomware is to back up all your data every day. That's your defense.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it does happen. You have the information backed up. It's not an emergency situation. Nobody panics. You're not going to lose anything.
Because we're seeing individual associations get hit with ransomware, but because it's backed up, and the key thing is that make sure that backed up is not infected. Sometimes you're backing up infected, software, then you're in trouble. But if you're not backed up, it's in the cloud, if it's done the right way, and again, if you have the policy, first thing you do is contact the coach, the breach coach there, to find out these things, and you really find out from an association point of view. Ransomware is not as significant. However, it becomes significant when a property management company is hit with ransomware and you don't have access to the information at all because they have access to the information and that information is let out. So then you end up in a little bit of trouble.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that would be really bad if it was not backed up at all and you lost all the information. And, a couple of examples come to mind with ransomware. There was actually a small town or city in Florida where the city hall records, the town records, they were hit by ransomware, and it was basically locked up for a while. And I think they did end up paying the ransom, if I'm not mistaken. And then it happened to a hospital in Los Angeles. I remember, I think it was the Good Samaritan Hospital, where they were hit by ransomware and all the patients' records were frozen and encrypted. And I think the hospital paid the ransom as well. So it's been happening.
And this was our first,
if
that
all
was our
these big
first one.
can be, the hospital.
Yeah, that's the first one. That created this whole ransomware situation. It's not one little hospital that did about 4 or 5 years ago. And from that point on, it is blown up. Again, we're talking about what kind of claims we're seeing. We're seeing ransomware. It's a big, big, big deal. Extortion payments is what it comes down to. And it's a business. It's a business, and it's going to impact us more and more and more. So, all right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, and I did want to take a second to mention that again, if anybody has any questions about any of this material, feel free to type it into the questions box and we'll answer them at the end. Okay, Kevin, so now we're going to talk about data breach.
All right, data breach is what we originally started all cyber with, is data breach. However, it's such a small portion of it. And when we talk about the kind of claims we're seeing, the number one is that we see the insured make a mistake and send out information on individuals who happen to live there incorrectly. It was a data breach because the information was there, not a big deal. A couple of them thought there was data breach itself, but it wasn't, after the research was done. The big one that I'm aware of is where a property manager left the information on a thumb drive on a plane. And what happened was they did the right thing. They notified the all the individual owners. They followed all the right requirements you're supposed to write. And then what happened? They found out, I just heard about a couple of weeks ago. Found out is that after a couple of years, they find out that people the stolen information has popped up. So
Oh, okay.
yeah. So that's the key
So
thing,
somebody,
you know.
so somebody found the thumb drive and then they stole the information and then
Yeah.
it was not good news for anybody.
It took,
Yeah,
but
that's the thing, Kevin. And
it
these
took 2 years
associations,
though before the information did it. It took 2 years. Yes.
interesting, 2 whole years. So, I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
could get lost today and you won't know until many years down the road that your information's being used by thieves or by criminals, or it's on the dark web, or, wherever this goes, the data that they steal. And the thing is, these associations, that's a scary thing for the homeowners when they realize that their data is out there, and there's been a breach. I mean, that's a very scary thing.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
lose a lot of trust.
And it does have a lot of fear involved because again, you don't know when that information will pop up. Again, this happened a couple of years ago. They found it in South Carolina. It happened. They discovered that these names are popping up in South Carolina. So data breach is really something. It really is. It could be. It
Yeah.
could be a mess. It could be a mess. Yeah.
Yes, and
And
it can be very expensive, right, Kevin? Let's talk about the costs a little bit, that it can get very expensive when a
that's the
company
point, though.
suffers a data breach.
If you look at these costs that's associated with data breach, and that's why we talk about ransomware or social engineering. These things may pop up later on as a result of a social engineering situation or ransomware. Now all of a sudden, there's been a data breach. So now you have to do the forensic examination, notification, call centers, credit ID monitoring, public relations, legal defense. These are the costs associated if you have a data breach. And again, a data breach can be part of a social engineering situation and can be part of ransomware. In fact, we do find it part of ransomware more than anything else.
Absolutely. Okay. So that's the data breach, everybody. And now we're going to talk about third-party cyber losses, privacy, and security. So let's talk about claims that you're seeing in that area, Kevin. We haven't talked about a couple of these situations before. They're new claims that have popped up.
This is interesting. This is the area that I was surprised about because when I thought about third-party cyber losses, I was thinking about things like failure to supervise, failure to take action to prevent a loss, failure to properly notify, failure to properly do the things you should be doing after a data breach. But what we end up seeing so far are privacy claims. The first one is a website access claim, where the individual actually filed a lawsuit it's like website discrimination coverage, website discrimination against somebody who's visually impaired. Okay. Because part of Title III of the ADA says that you can't discriminate or you have to have public accommodations on the internet. So if you're using a website, you have to have accessibility if you are visually impaired or audibly impaired or any other disability.
Right. And this is the first time we've seen this type of claim, right, Kevin? Very first one to pop up.
Yes. Website discrimination is interesting. Something I didn't expect to see.
Yes. Very, very interesting. And then the other thing is go ahead. I was going to ask you biometric. That's a big term. Can you tell us what that means?
This is interesting. Again, these are things that weren't aware of, but we got to be aware of them. This complaint alleged that the property manager obtained biometric information from his employees and it violated privacy rights under the Biometric Information Privacy Act. Okay, so what is that?
No, I've never heard of it. I don't think any of you joining us has heard of this before.
Exactly. Okay, this is something new. I had to research this myself. So the Biometric Information Privacy Act is an Illinois statute that took effect in October 2008 and protects individuals against unlawful collection, use, and storage of biometric information such as fingerprints, iris scans, and face prints.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Now,
okay.
yes.
So
So
if an
this is
association
interesting. This is
asks for
new
this,
stuff. This is new. Okay. Now,
yeah. Mhm.
it started with Illinois, but since then, four other states have adopted. You talk about Arkansas, California, Texas, and Washington, and another 27 states have pending litigation on the same topic.
Hmm. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah, I would think where privacy would become an issue where everywhere you go now, it's your fingerprint, it's a picture of your face. I mean, I could see where that could become issues down the road if that's stolen or if it's that company's hacked and then
Yeah.
your face or your fingerprint is out there. Let's think
Mhm.
about that.
Yep.
You know,
Yep. Yep. So right
hmm
now, okay, again, this is interesting. These are things that, these are this is brand new stuff, okay, that we're learning. Once we get the claim for something that we never even knew that it was exposure out there for. So the unlawful collecting, storing, disseminating useful and using biometric data in violation. This is a property manager happening. This is not some big, this is us. This is our business here that's impacting. So be careful.
hmm
Be careful. So,
Be careful.
um,
Yes,
mhm,
yes. Find out what the responsibilities are if you're collecting this type of information from homeowners. You know, how to be responsible with it and make sure it's protected if you do
mhm,
collect the information. Absolutely.
mhm.
Okay. And a few questions have come in. We'll get to you in a few minutes when we're almost done. And now, Kevin, let's talk about some best practices to reduce the overall cyber exposure. You know, what are some things that people can do regarding protection and making sure that they don't get hit with a big claim?
Okay, four things. Number one, multi-factor authentication. This is the most important. We found out that if you have just this one thing, you end up reducing cyber losses significantly. The percentage is like 80 to 90%. So just doing this one thing really saves you. Number two is passwords. Change your passwords. The main one here is to be defensive. Be defensive. Look at everything like it's being like you're being like something they want to steal data from you, but they want to do something. So you look at it, you be defensive, and then finally have an adequate cyber insurance policy. And what I would do is quickly go over that so we can answer some of your questions in terms of what we're seeing out there. When you're talking about cyber, everything we talked about is covered under these six things. When you talk about cyber liability coverage, these are the things for the privacy issue. Cyber first party coverage is the security notifications and all the expenses we talked about earlier. The notification, examination, the call centers, all those different things there is covered under there. Extortion coverage. Got to have extortion coverage. It's there. Then we have computer crime, funds transfer coverage, and social engineering. If you have a cyber policy with these coverages, you will be okay. All right, good.
Okay.
We went
Great
through all
information.
that
Thank you,
stuff.
Kevin.
Yes. So now let's do some
Yes, that was
Q
a
and A.
lot of
Q and
information.
A.
Yes. Okay, let's check and see what questions we have. Thank you, everybody, for typing them in. And Bill asks, will you be sending copies of the slides? Yes, I'll give you my email address. So please send me an email. Anybody who would like a copy of these slides, it's sherry.branson@amwins.com. And Sherry is SHERRY .Branson, BRANSON @amwins.com. Feel free to send me an email and I'll send you the slides. Okay, let's see what questions we have. I'll start in the beginning. Lori Ryder. Hi, Lori. Thanks for joining us today. I've known Lori for many years. One of our community associations also incurred additional costs to come up with alternative ways to track access to the pool, gym, etc., while the systems were being repaired. Well, this is interesting. Is there coverage on the policy for these additional costs?
Well, okay, costs have to be incurred as a result of a data breach or some kind of a breach. So if the cost was not part of that, then no. But again, when you talk about security and remediation coverages, extra expenses, most expenses are being paid after the data breach. So if after the data breach, I would say it should be coverage. but it has to be a data breach first before they find out. And I'll give you an example of a
Okay.
situation that I
Has
just
to be
heard about.
claimed. There has to be some kind of a claim.
Yes, and situation is we also coverage, and we didn't talk about, there's a telecommunication fraud endorsement coverage. And we found out that Verizon, one of our homeowner associations was being hacked. Not being hacked, but there was a bill coming on because of somebody got into the system, but it wasn't a claim under the
Somebody's using
policy.
their phones. They were
Somebody's
using the
using their
phones or
phones,
something.
yes,
Hmm.
inappropriately, that caused $100,000 loss from Verizon. Okay. But there was no hack. They couldn't find a hack, so the cyber policy did not defend it. They needed a telecommunication fraud endorsement that was not available at the point in time, but there was no hack itself that lended the coverage.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
interesting. 100,000. That's a lot of phone calls. $100,000 phone
That's
bill.
a
Wow.
lot of phone calls. Yes.
That's a lot of phone calls. Yeah. And now Bill Doherty, let's see. Thanks, Bill, for sending in your question. What's the average cost of a social engineering claim, average cost of a ransomware claim, including ransom paid, forensic costs, and breach costs?
Well, the last time I checked for a data breach is like, oh man, I forgot the amount. But you can just Google and they'll tell you exactly what that. But in terms of social engineering, it varies. It could be as low as $1,000. Where in fact it happened to me, where somebody called in. I was going to Hawaii a couple of years ago, and they went right into the internet and saw I was going to go to LinkedIn. That I was doing a seminar. So the first thing they do was call up our controller and ask for gift cards. I'm in Hawaii. Please send me gift cards. Now my controller called me. It didn't happen. So it could be as low as that, or it can be $1,000. It can be, guess what? I need a new painting. I need to update the um, the lobby area. Please submit. Here's $15,000 bill. Please pay it. Now. So it can go up. It can be incredible amounts. But again, on a community association, it could be $100,000, $50,000. It won't be in the millions, but it could be. You should have a significant limit on under the social engineering.
Hmm.
On the ransomware coverage, it's not going to be a lot for the community associations, but the property managers have a lot because they have a lot of data and a lot of things that happen. Make sure you have the coverage. Don't worry about the limit right now. Just make sure you have some coverage because every little bit helps.
Hmm. Yeah, it really depends on the nature of the claim and how big the claim, how much is stolen and how much information is lost, that kind of a thing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. We have a question from Michael Miles. Thank you, Michael, for your question. Does the HOA's cyber coverage extend to the property manager? Should they be involved in the loss of data or funds?
Okay, it depends on the coverage. Certain coverages do, certain coverages that do not. The data breach coverage, yes, it does. The I'm worried about the ransomware coverage, the extortion coverage, because if the property manager is held for a ransom, it's their loss, even though association data is there. So I'd be more worried about that. So the property manager have their coverage, even though it's association data that's being held at ransom. So some coverages are, some coverages are not.
Okay. And okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. And then Judy has a similar question to what was asked before. She wants to know what a true cyber claim extortion data breach cost is and what fees, costs, indemnity were covered. It's a little.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, the the average, you know what? I guess I should have done the average claim. A lot of these claims are still being investigated. A lot of these claims are these are claims that happened over the past 3 years. Okay. We're not going back 10,
Right, they're
50
brand
years.
new.
These are from
Hmm.
2019 to 2021. So over the past 2 years. So it's hard to really say what the costs are, even on the data breach side, because the data breach didn't really have impact, significant impact. We just had to pay some fees. To get a consultant in. They're trying to figure out what's going on. Again, get the coverage, and then worry about, do you have enough.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Hey, great information, Kevin. And
Mhm.
Evelyn, she'd like to see the cyber slide again with what's needed on cyber. Evelyn, if you could send me an email to sherry.branson@amwins.com, I can send you the whole slide presentation, and then you'll have that slide, to look at again. And if you have any questions, let me know. And just, I did want to mention one more time, I record all of the webinars and I put the recordings on our website, which is kdisonline.com. And if you think of any other questions later on that you'd like to ask me, feel free to send me your questions. I'm happy to answer your questions. I'll give you a call, or Kevin will give you a call, and we'll answer any of your questions at that point. And thank you, Kevin. Thank you for a great webinar today. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. Thank you for being a customer. And please join us in May as we do a very interesting webinar. Do you know claims you should be worried about?
Yeah.
I'm worried. I don't know about you, but I'm worried. Hey,
All right. Thanks a lot.
thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Have a great
All
afternoon.
right, take care. All
Send
right,
me an
take care,
email. Take
everybody.
care. Bye-bye. Bye.